New circular on certificates of origin issued in Vietnam. Vietnamese startups to go global. Hello there, you're tuning into another edition of BizLine on VTV International. I'm your host Hoàng Hằng, and as Vietnam bids farewell to the Year of the Dog, we will now review some top highlights, wrapping up a positive year for economic development in Vietnam. The Ministry of Industry and Trade has issued Circular Number 3, stipulating the Certificates of Origins rule in the Comprehensive and Progressive Agreement for Trans-Pacific Partnership, otherwise known as CPTPP. The circular will take effect from March the 8th this year. Vietnamese goods exported before the effective date of this circular, certificates of origin granting agencies and organizations shall consider granting certificates of origin forms to enjoy tariff preferences under the agreement and regulations of importing member countries. Only when the origin requirements are met can Vietnamese products be exported to new markets to enjoy preferential tariffs. This is a strict rule of origin to prevent countries that are not members of the agreement from taking advantage of tax incentives. Foreign direct investment or FDI pledge to Vietnam witnessed a significant yearly increase of 52% to $1.9 billion in the first month of this year. The Ministry of Planning and Investment said on Monday, the manufacturing and processing sector retained its crown as the most attractive sector to foreign investors, accounting for $1.19 billion or 62.4% of total registered capital. The science and technology sector beat the retail sector to rank second with $185.6 million or 9.7%. Among 51 countries and territories investing in Vietnam, Japan remained the leading investor with nearly $364 million, followed by the Republic of Korea and China. The food and drinks processing industry has seen growth of 7% in recent years, with more and more foreign investors deciding to pour money into the sector. According to experts, the food and drink sector is now taking the largest proportion of monthly spending for Vietnamese, around 35%. Export turnover for food processing and agricultural products totaled more than $40 billion last year. Vietnamese products have successfully reached many technical standards and quality barriers and are present in 200 countries, including the US, Japan, the Republic of Korea, and the EU. For foreign investors, the abundance of agricultural products in the country is an advantage. Vietnam is considered one of the top 5 food baskets in the world and among the 50 largest agricultural exporters. According to the most recent data published by the General Statistics Office, Vietnam's Consumer Price Index or CPI only increased by 0.1% over the previous month and 2.56% over the same period last year. As January is the month right before the Lunar New Year, people's consumption often soars. However, January CPI only increased slightly because abundant supply of goods for date had been well prepared beforehand. Compared to the previous month, 9 among 11 of the main product and service groups increased, with drinks and tobacco increasing the highest. Commercial banks are taking rapid measures to ensure ATM service quality and safety during the Lunar New Year holiday, when there is high demand for cash transactions. In Hanoi, the funding for ATMs makes up $18 million per day, up from the usual $11 million per day. The demand for cash withdrawal in just a month has reached billions of dollars. Service providers are asked to check their ATM systems to ensure card payments are secured. Attention must be paid to upgrading software and the operation of cameras and maintenance to ensure ATMs are working efficiently. They must also supervise the operation of their ATM networks, especially in industrial parks, export processing zones, and densely populated areas with high demand for cash to proactively detect and promptly solve any technical problems. Deputy Prime Minister Trịnh Đình Dũng just signed a decision to approve a scheme for enhancing air connectivity with tourism markets. The plan is to open new routes, increase the frequency on the existing routes between Vietnam and key tourist markets around the world, including the US, France, England, Japan, South Korea, China, Thailand, Singapore and India, and open new domestic routes connecting key tourist areas of the country's northeast region, central Vietnam, south central coast highlands, Mekong Delta and Phu Quoc Pearl Island, contributing to the development of the tourism sector. Those are some economic highlights over the past week. Up next in our crosstalk, we'll discuss the strategies for Vietnamese startups to go global. Stay tuned. Startups have been bandied around the increasing frequency over the past few years to describe scrappy young entrepreneurs with critical solutions. But the key attribute of a startup is its ability to grow. Speaking of this, many Vietnamese startups have led the way in going global, yet many of them are experiencing both ups and downs. So what should be the strategies for startups to go global? Are there any common formulas for all the startups to swim overseas? Our crosstalk today will show you more. But first, let's take a look at the following clip.
EasyCloud is the first Vietnamese company to offer hotel management solutions abroad, with a presence in 5 countries around the world. Other Vietnamese startups that have successfully gone overseas include Fastgo, Biketing, Vientrip, Designbold. These are just some of successful Vietnamese startups who went overseas. According to statistics from the Ministry of Science and Technology, Vietnam has more than 3,000 startups businesses operating, compared to with 1,800 in 2015. Many startups have attracted domestic and foreign investment funds, which is a favorable condition for them to fulfill their ambitions to reach the world. However, coming up with a great business idea is just the beginning. The conquest of foreign markets is not simple, especially under the context that many Vietnamese startups are lack of experience, capital, and technology.
We have in our studio today the 2 main guests who will join us in our following talks. First, Bobby Liu, currently the Senior Director of Topica EdTech Group and also co-founder of Topica Founder Institute, and Quân Lê, co-founder and CEO of Binkabi, a fintech startup headquartered in Nigeria, London and Hanoi. Well, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Now, sink or swim may be the most frequently asked question when it comes to startups. Does it actually mean that startup swims when it successfully go global or attract foreign investors? Bobby, could you tell us a little bit from your experience?
The fundamental explanation of swim or sink is survival. And then you become Michael Phelps when you're able to go global, right? It's not easy building any kind of business. It's not easy to go alone in doing what you want to do, especially in disruptive spaces. So yeah, it takes a while to build the startup to a certain level of scale for acceptance. And during that period of time, basically, if you're still surviving, we call it you're still swimming. And obviously, unfortunately, a lot of startups, do not survive that, initial period, 2-3 years. A lot of all these startups, I think the good founders, right, even though they may not survive the first couple of years, usually a lot of them would come back and do something else later, a second startup or third startup, and eventually they do swim and then become a success.
And what about Binkabi, Quân? What are your orientations?
Okay, so Binkabi is a startup in financial technology, and we are a platform for issuing, trading, and financing commodities on the blockchain. And at the moment, we focus on both domestic and international markets. For domestic markets, our first market is not in Vietnam, but actually in Africa. So we're actually based in London, but work mainly in Africa, in countries like Nigeria, Ghana, Kenya, and South Africa. And because of the nature of our business, which is focused on also international trading, we have to go global because that is part of the business itself.
Now, an argument that actually echoes your opinion, Bobby, that is some say that to go global, startup need to go local first. Others think that unlike big corporations, startup can go global and local at the same time. So what are your opinions?
It really depends on what you're doing. There's no, it's really hard to generalize. In the context of Vietnam, 99% of ideas are more of local adoption. But then there are, great ideas that come out of Vietnam, and I think in a generalized sense, for example, right? Then I think you have to conquer the local market first, right? And then think about, if the solutions that you have are also, similar solutions to existing problems that other countries are facing. And if there are no better solutions, for example, then yes, you have an opportunity to scale out. And in our program at Topical Founder Institute, we also had a startup that pretty much didn't offer a solution that had local adoption. But he had great successes when he went to Silicon Valley, right? And then of course we have for Topical, for example, we've got high level of success in Thailand when we expanded there about 4 years ago.
Do you have anything to add to?
Sure.
Bobby?
With international trading, you basically have complexities of involving more than one country, so different legal systems, but also international trade can be very cumbersome. So we actually deliberately also try to sort of do well in a local market for sort of high volume, low value kind of commodities. And then for international market, we only focus on some very specific commodities like rice and cashew nuts, because those are the existing flows between Vietnam and Africa, and there's a lot of issues in there. But we are not trying to do every single thing in international trade.
To understand more about the Go Global strategies that startups can adopt, we will be speaking with our reporter Dai Chang in the studio today. Hello, Dai Chang.
Well, thank you, Hoàng Hằng, for having me. While many startups often ask themselves whether to go local or go global, and I totally agree with Bobby and Won's viewpoints that startups today need to acquire the domestic market first, and they only go overseas when they are big enough. Now, this can be seen through the cases of FPT, Viettel, Oh Hành, and Gia Lai, and these are the very prominent examples for this strategy. And going global is different from going local, as you need to do lots of researches and in terms of market entrance, customer targets, and market segmentation. And all these require the accumulation of experiences and capital. However, startups can skip this step, or in other words, go global right in the first phase. And this reminds me of the Flappy Bird app by Nguyễn Hà Đông, or even Binkabi Quan, right? So what about your comments on this strategy, Quan?
You're right. So these days, for some kind of startup, especially when it comes to software-based startup, we can actually go global. Because it's software-based, it doesn't really matter where you sit.
Yes.
It matters where you can actually create a product, and that product's being accepted by the markets that you're targeting.
So now, with the help of angel investors or venture funds or incubators and also accelerator programs, and their connections also, startups can shorten the time to go overseas. As part of your business, have connected you with those stakeholders. So what are your comments?
Our program, Topical Founder Institute, this program is run in 6 different countries in Southeast Asia, but globally, is run in 180 different cities. So it is truly a global program, and from a global context, we have more than 9,000 mentors that our graduates can actually tap into. In Vietnam, since running it since 2011, I think in Vietnam alone, we have probably more than, I would say, easily 200 mentors that the local graduates can actually tap into.
Thank you very much for your information. So now, for startups going global, it also means thinking about where you will scale next and how you will scale your business. And thank you for joining me in our discussion. And the following report will show you how investors and accelerators can help startups in reaching their global dreams. In the last days of 2018, Fasgo, a Vietnamese ride-hailing app, launched its first foreign brand in Myanmar, and the next destination would be Indonesia. This technology startup has received capital from Vina Capital Ventures, a $100 million venture capital fund aiming at Vietnamese technology startups.
Chúng tôi đặt cái mục tiêu là có khoảng 2 triệu người dùng trong năm tới. Chúng tôi sẽ tiếp tục mở rộng ra các dịch vụ trong cái hệ sinh thái này, nó không chỉ vận chuyển.
Venture capital funds also emphasize that tech startups with innovative ideas, technological intensity, and potential to develop overseas are the key factors to consider for investment.
We have a strong emphasis on fintech and a lot of technologies that are surrounding the consumers, the people in Vietnam. But we are at the same time we are also opportunistic with the promising companies. When we see good founders, when we see good companies with good solutions, we will consider to invest as well.
Recently, Korea's biggest venture fund, the Korean Venture Investment Corp, or KVIC, confirmed to be the next one to enter the Vietnamese startups market. Through cooperation with the Ministry of Science and Technology, a joint venture fund will be established that help Vietnamese startups to explore the Korean market.
베트남 따로, 한국 따로, 실리콘밸리 따로 하는 기준이 있을 것 같지는 않습니다. 항상 같은 기준일 텐데요. 첫 번째로는 엔터프레너십을 가지고 있느냐, 끝까지 도전할 수 있는 그런 아주 뛰어난 엔터프레너십을 가진 젊은이들이 있느냐는 게 첫 번째고요. 두 번째는 역시 그 테크놀로지라든가 새로운 이노버티브한 서비스 모델이라든가.
Besides venture funds, startups now can receive supports from incubators and also accelerator programs in the country to reach overseas markets. Launched in January 2017 by FPT Ventures and Dragon Capital, Vietnam Innovative Startup Accelerator, or VISA, has become one of the most prestigious startup accelerators in Vietnam.
Chúng tôi đang hoạt động theo mô hình là Venture Builder, có nghĩa là chúng tôi sẽ cùng đi cùng các cái startup. Chúng tôi có những cái chuyên gia hệ thống mạng lưới có thể giúp các startup giảm đến cái thời gian ra thị trường nhiều nhất có thể. Đấy, ngoài ra thì chúng tôi đầu sáng lập quỹ Visa là quỹ tăng tốc khởi nghiệp cho các công ty startup tại Việt Nam.
Now, Bobby, going overseas means that Vietnamese startup must receive investment fund from venture fund or through M&A. So, do you have any recommendations for startup in such process to have better connection with venture fund and foreign investors?
I think investors look for different things. Some investors really do look at local domination, especially the bigger brick and mortar business. For startups, yes, I think if you have a great product to solve and great solutions to solve existing problems, and these problems are not necessarily solved in the best way outside of Vietnam, for example, then I think that presents a great opportunity for startups. And when that happens, investors will kind of sniff you out, right? In the last 3-4 years, we have more and more VCs coming to Vietnam on a regular basis. I remember back in 2013, 2014, if we ever hosted 3 in a year, then the whole ecosystem would be like really busy, And last Monday alone, I hosted 5 VCs from Korea, in one day. And in terms of like funding, it's just that, if you're growing, they know. And if you do, provide a very compelling story in how you're able to expand, then I believe the funding will come.
I was recently in South Africa, and actually one of the government officials there actually cited Vietnam as one of the sort of up and coming country. Yeah. So I think the fact that we have interest, right? Young population here, the economy has been growing at 6-7% consistently in the last quarter of the century. And a population that is very sort of receptive in terms of new technology, I think that has the attention of the global investment circles. So I think I agree with you. I think increasingly you'll see a lot of foreign investors actually coming in here to look for those opportunities, as opposed to those companies actually have to go out to look for them.
Yeah. Just to put it in context, last year's funding into Vietnam startup is 3 times that of 2017.
Yeah.
So, you know, the growth has been,
one of the biggest in Southeast Asia as well.
Yeah, we're probably second behind Singapore, of course.
Yeah.
I think, is this, sort of like a perfect storm of development that's happening in Vietnam.
That's very promising news, actually. So with such ambition set for Binkabi, did you find many obstacles during the expansion or basically going global?
Even though the issues facing the agriculture supply chain might be very, actually surprisingly similar from one country to another, but they are within different legal contexts. Apart from Vietnam, we focus on English-speaking countries because our headquarters is in London, so those countries actually share the same sort of legal basis as English law. So that there's some kind of commonality among the markets that basically help to reduce the obstacles. But really, when you talk about Africa, it's 54 different countries, and they all have different stages of development and different environment. So there are many obstacles, not just from the technology point of view, but also from the legal and, of course, when you're trying to bring something new to the market, it's adoption from the general population.
This company exports Vietnamese peppers, ginger, and spices to many countries using traditional methods. Like other agro-businesses, it has been experiencing extra costs due to over-reliance on US dollar, middlemen, big risks besides others.
Chúng tôi thực hiện một giao dịch mất khoảng 3 ngày, thì chúng tôi muốn tăng được cái tốc độ giao dịch đấy. Cái thứ hai là muốn tìm kiếm thêm những cái cơ hội bán hàng của Việt Nam mình ra nước ngoài nhưng với danh nghĩa là thương hiệu.
Those issues are expected to be resolved with a decentralized commodity trading by Binkabi. Here, the platform puts commodities on the blockchain through a process called tokenization. Specific units of commodities such as maize or rice are converted into tokens, which are then traded.
By you being able to access to the emerging market, commodity market, then you need Binkabi token. And then when you're having trade, you need Binkabi token in order to receive discount. And these discounts are perpetual, that you can use it again and again and again.
It is clear that technology and online platforms are giving tremendous global access for startups to consumers and markets, not only in thousands, but in millions. This suggests the government and citizens embrace the revolution because it is happening across the world.
Cơ hội này là cơ hội rất đặc biệt, nó cho phép một doanh nghiệp Việt Nam sẽ có một vị thế rất đặc biệt nếu mà chấp nhận cái cuộc chơi toàn cầu này, chấp nhận cái cạnh tranh trong digital transformation thì sẽ trở thành những công ty hàng đầu thế giới.
Held in Da Nang City last December, TechFest Vietnam 2018 was with the guiding principle, from here to global. The event attracted partners from around the globe such as Singapore, Malaysia, South Korea, with $8 million committed for startups projects. Under the framework of TechFest 2018, Prime Minister Nguyễn Xuân Phúc also proposed establishing a national startup center.
Now, Vietnam does not rank high in terms of productivity or technology. So does it imply that technology plays a key role for the Vietnamese startups to leverage themselves and directly compete with global competitors? Bobby?
I think it's all relative term. At least if you just look at the Southeast Asia market, in terms of technology, Vietnam is actually known as a the hub for tech talents. Many startups actually come here to look for programmers, for example. And in the past, prior to this whole fervor in startups, all along, I mean, like FPT, whom you've mentioned earlier, have done a great job, doing a lot of software outsourcing for international projects. Generally, Vietnamese are quite entrepreneurial. I mean, look at Vươn, right? So, yeah, and then it's a great combination. And this is often spoken amongst a lot of investors, that basically you need to develop more software architects.
Okay.
I think for me, the key words here is value addition. So the trade flow between Vietnam, for example, and South Africa is about $1.5 billion a year, but $1 billion of that is actually mobile phones.
Right.
And when you actually look closer, then most of that is actually from Samsung.
Yeah.
And Samsung only do mainly assembly in local markets. So all the sort of equipment and all the parts already been imported. So only tiny value addition is actually done locally. So I think that is the issue that Vietnam has to deal with in terms of actually moving up the value chain, actually adding more sort of value in terms of contents, and actually moving away from processing or from kind of outsourcing, and actually moving into innovation and creating products that solve problems. So it's only the matter of how do you actually adapt the solution for a specific market, but the basic building blocks of the solutions are quite the same, and effectively you're solving similar problems in different markets. So I think sitting here in Vietnam, sometimes we feel like going global is such a difficult thing, right? Because you have different differences in terms of culture and legal systems and languages, for example. But actually, the problems are actually more common than you think. Especially if you approach it from a technology or software kind of based technology point of view. Of course, if you have a brick and mortar business and you actually selling a pork product, then it might be doing very well in Singapore, Vietnam, and China, but not doing so well in sort of Muslim country, for example. So that is where I think what the problem you're trying to solve, it actually dictates how easy or how difficult it is for you to go global.
Will 2019 open up new opportunities for Vietnamese startups to go overseas? Bobby?
Tough question. I think the momentum is strong in terms of connection network, and yes, the opportunities are definitely there, and I think the opportunities are even better, I would say. I mean, a good example would be VNG, right? There was no need for them to even expand outside, and they are already, a certified unicorn, right? For Topica, from education standpoint, again, is solving a common problem, right? Providing, skills, upskilling, the emerging market people, right? And that is a common problem, and I think we have a fairly good solutions for that. And so, in terms of scaling in that sense, it's really not that difficult. It
seems like we just enter a new growth phase in Vietnam. So I think there will be a lot of opportunities here. So for the startup that sort of focusing on solving a particular issues, I think there's enough opportunities in the local market. I think looking across Southeast Asia, even though it has different sort of countries, different languages, different barriers, but actually those are opportunities in themselves. Because of those barriers that the startup that can solve those issues make it difficult for other startups to get in. So because of high barriers to entry.
Once again, thank you for our guests.
Thank you.
And that also wraps up our last edition of BizLine for the Year of the Dog. From our team here at VTV International, enjoy your New Year celebration and don't forget to join us next year for more economic news from Vietnam. In the meantime, do log on to vtv4.vtv.vn or youtube.com/vtv4go for more of our programs and updates. Thanks for joining us and Happy New Year.